Welcome back. Let's animate right away. This time I will be animating our cube jump straight ahead and feel the timing as I go. We already have our first key, but we didn't set the right place of our cube in the scene yet. We'll be working in the side camera view mode, but first let's select the cube translate control and then bring our cube a little bit to the left side. This will be our first pose. Since we don't have any other animation before the one that we'll be creating, we want to have some time at the beginning so that our audience can notice the start of our animation and understand it. Let's have 8 frames for that hold at the beginning. So on frame 8, select all the controls and set a key with the same pose that we have on frame 1. During these 8 frames, nothing is happening, so we created a small hold for the audience to have a moment to catch up with what is going on in our scene, and from here we can start animating the cube. I know that first I want to create anticipation for my cube before the jump, so in 4 frames, our cube will stretch a little bit up, just a tiny bit. Then in 6 frames, our cube will squash down, but not all the way down. The biggest squashed value that our cube can get is negative 0.5. But we don't want to have such an extreme pose yet. So here we'll set it to the value of negative 0.3. So in 6 frames, our cube goes down, then we want to have a hold. We'll go to, let's say, frame 35, and here we'll set our cube to have the most extreme squashed value. So what is happening now? Our cube goes a little bit up before it goes down, then it goes quickly to a squashed down position, and continues to further squash, creating a moving hold. When the cube continues to squash throughout the long period of time and is getting a very small difference in value, it first seems as if nothing is happening. And although our eyes can't really see the difference, it can be felt. So that is why it's called a moving hold. Here, you can see how the cube quickly goes down and then continues to squash. From here, we'll jump into the air. And just like we previously did with the ball, we know that when the cube jumps, it needs to stretch up. So let's go 3 frames further and stretch the cube. It will have its most stretched pose here. We want the cube to have this shape when it is already off the ground. So a frame before that, we want to select the cube translate control and save a key. So this will be the cube's last pose when it still contacts the ground. Then the cube jumps and reaches its highest position in the air in 10 frames. Because the cube will be jumping across the screen, I want to first set our cube's position when it drops to the ground on the other side, before we set the position in the air, so that we have a good timing of our cube's horizontal movement. We should be jumping up for 10 frames and then dropping down for another 10 frames. So on frame 57, I want our cube to be on the side of the screen. Now that I have my cube going to the right, on frame 47, I can bring my cube up. Don't forget to zero out the translation Y on this frame. So we go up and down. Now we can continue working with the squash and stretch. Here, when our cube is already off the ground, we have our stretched pose. Then, when our cube reaches its top position in the air, we want our squash and stretch to be zeroed down. Then, because we know that our cube comes in contact with the ground on frame 57, we want to stretch our cube again a frame before that. From that, in 3 frames, we'll squash the cube down because our cube is already on the ground. This is the time when we have to settle, because our cube comes to the ground with a lot of force and squashes down extremely. It has a lot of energy, and from there it stretches up before returning to its normal shape. So in 3 frames, we need to stretch up the cube a little bit, and then in 3 more frames, it comes to its normal shape, so we zero out the squash. Let's look at what we have. We go a little bit up, before we go down. Then we have a moving hold when it continues to squash down even further. Then we jump up, and when we are already off the ground, we reach the most stretched pose. Then, on the top position in the air, we return to a normal shape. And then, right before we touch the ground, we stretch again. Finally, we contact the ground and squash down. Then we stretch up a bit before returning to the original shape. And then we still have enough frames left at the end, when nothing is happening again, just like at the beginning, for the audience to catch all the details that are happening on the last frames of our animation. If we were to shrink the timeline to our last pose, our eyes would not be able to notice all the details at the end and see that we have a settle. If we have a break when nothing is happening, then we're able to notice the last part of the animation. We can play the animation once, and then we'll definitely go to the graph editor and clean up the curves to get the results that we want. It looks okay, but we can see that the jumping part is too slow, because we have auto tangents with a slow in and slow out, so we need to fix those details. Let's go to the graph editor. First, we want to start our cleanup on the main control that we use for our cube's translations, because it is responsible for the main action and influences everything else. Perhaps let's begin with the translation Z channel, which is responsible for our cube's movement from left to right throughout the jump. I don't want to have a slow out when the ball is taking off the ground, nor do I want the ball to slow down before hitting the ground. Our cube needs to have a constant speed when going from left to right during the jump, so I will set this curve to a linear one. Now let's go to the translation Y. Here we have the jump, and we need to jump off the ground with enough energy, then slow down a bit at the top of the arc, then come to the ground and accelerate the same way as we had with the ball jump, and have a fast drop here. Let's select those two keys and break the tangents, then bring the handles up. Next, let's select the stretch upper control and look at its curve. Here at the beginning, it's okay to have this flowy curve. But then we know that when the ball jumps, it needs to reach its stretch pose without any slow in. Nor do I want to stay in the stretched pose for any longer, so I'll bring the other handle down as well so that our cube could go back to its normal shape a bit faster. I want to do the same thing on the other side of the jump, because I want the cube to have a sudden and accelerated come to this stretch pose without the slow in, and I don't want to stay in that pose for long. So when I come to the ground, I no longer have any stretch, and I start to squash down. Then we have a settle, and these transitions look all right. We can check the animation and see the changes that we made in the graph editor. Let's hide the NURBS curves and play the animation. So here's our anticipation jump. I hope you were able to follow along. I recommend you play more with this exercise by yourself. You can push the squash and stretch as far as you want to. You can even add some squash and stretch to the lower stretch control. If you did that on the pose when the cube is up in the air, it would give even more flexibility to the cube. Or play with the timing and spacing to just really get a feeling of how the things work and what works the best.